Everyone, I'm Spiro with ActivistPost.com. Thanks for tuning in. Now, the Pfizer COVID vaccine is already being administered to the public in the UK, and the first doses of the vaccine have been given here in the US ahead of a mass vaccination campaign on a global scale. Recently, I published a report concerning the potential adverse reactions to the Pfizer COVID vaccine that the CDC and FDA will be watching for, including death. We examined reported adverse reactions in the participants of the trials, which are still ongoing, and we also looked at reported side effects which took place on the very first day the vaccine was rolled out in the UK. Now, it's important to recognize that the Pfizer COVID vaccine has not been approved by regulatory agencies such as the FDA. It has only received emergency use authorization, meaning that the vaccine has not gone through the standard process to get official approval from the regulatory agencies. Now, it was just reported that 2 healthcare workers who received the experimental shot in Alaska experienced severe adverse events after taking the experimental COVID vaccine. Healthcare workers in Chattanooga, Tennessee received the vaccine, and about 10 or 15 minutes later, a nurse who received the shot passed out on live TV. I'd like to make a quick correction to my previous report where I misstated that this took place in Chicago. It was actually Chattanooga, Tennessee. My mistake. I apologize. Now, the local media reported that the nurse did regain consciousness and appeared to be okay, which is a good thing, of course. But remember, this is an experimental vaccine that has not received official approval from government regulators, only receiving the emergency use authorization. And the trials are still ongoing, so that makes this an experimental vaccine in my book, and the public appears to be the guinea pigs. Now, multiple governments have warned that pregnant women and children should not take the shot at this time, and they've also warned that people with allergies to medicine, vaccines, or even food to avoid the shot for now. But one of the Alaska healthcare workers who suffered a severe allergic reaction had no history of allergies and had to seek emergency medical treatment after she suffered an anaphylactic reaction and developed a rash over her face and torso, shortness of breath, and an elevated heart rate. Now, both workers in Alaska who experienced the adverse reaction only after a few minutes of taking the experimental shot had to be hospitalized in the emergency room, and one was admitted to the ICU. 95% effective, huh? Well, we will address that shortly. Just like the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine just received preliminary approval from the FDA Board of Advisors. And so it's going to be getting, if it hasn't already, it's going to receive emergency use authorization, and the shipments of this Moderna vaccine could roll out as soon as next week. Now, recently I had Dr. James Lyons-Weiler on my show. He's a research scientist who co-authored a study comparing vaccinated and unvaccinated children. I just interviewed his co-author, Dr. Paul Thomas, who had his medical license suspended after that study was published. Now, that interview is going to be coming out very soon. Now, recently I came across the FDA document evaluating the Moderna vaccine and had some questions and concerns, so I called Dr. Weiler and asked him if he had seen it. He said that he had not seen it, so I sent it over to him and asked him if he could review it and get back to me, which he did a few hours later. He even wrote an article about it that'll be published very soon, but he had sent me a copy of this article and gave me permission to reference it. Now, one of my concerns that prompted me to contact Dr. Weiler was that there were 13 deaths reported in the trials of Moderna, 6 from the vaccinated group and 7 from the placebo group. Yet somehow Moderna was able to make the determination that none of the deaths were a result of the vaccine or the placebo. Now, something else I found very interesting from the FDA.gov report on the Moderna vaccine was that during data cleaning, a trial participant who received the vaccine was updated from death to severe adverse event. Additionally, during the data cleaning, a placebo participant was updated from severe adverse event to death. It's interesting. So now I'm going to share with you what Dr. Weiler wrote in his yet-to-be-published article, with his permission, of course. Some very interesting and concerning points. And the article is titled, Discrepancies in Moderna's FDA Report Demand Answers. Now, I'm not going to be able to read the entire article. Hopefully there will be a link out soon, and I will try to update that and get that link included once it's published. But I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, and it says, however, in contrast to what Moderna reported to the FDA, their mRNA vaccines are not established technology. It is new. As a new experimental vaccine, it deserves close and objective scrutiny. We have been told in press releases that the vaccine has a 94.5% efficacy rate. The efficacy of vaccines is understood to be a measure of effectiveness of the vaccine on an ideal population. This differs from effectiveness, which is how well the vaccine manages to induce evidence of immunity in the real population of which it's being used. In the Moderna study, they calculated efficacy as the ratio of the rate of SARS-CoV SARS-CoV-2 infection in the vaccinated, which is 16 infected out of the 28,000 vaccinated, to the rate of infection in the placebo group, which was 275 infected out of the nearly 28,000 given the placebo. Close inspection of the Moderna report reveals that among the vaccinated, an additional 81 participants that received the vaccine and an additional 118 placebo participants developed COVID-19 diagnosis between the first and second shots. These participants were determined to be ineligible for the second dose and were removed from the study. These additional cases shift Dr. Weiler's calculations, the vaccine efficacy from 94.5% to 75.4%. He goes on to state that if a chemotherapy agent is being tested against another treatment of cancer, the deaths that occur between scheduled rounds of treatment must be counted. It's misleading not to count these additional cases of COVID-19 in the Moderna vaccine trial. Their 94.5 efficacy has no basis in clinical reality, even for an ideal population. Now, Dr. Weiler's article goes on to state that another problem with Moderna's report is the data on safety. And he goes on to reference what I was talking about earlier about switching the deaths from severe adverse events to deaths and then vice versa. Now, he goes on to state that because there were only 13 deaths in the overall entire study, 6 vaccinated and 7 unvaccinated, given the full number of patients as the 2 reporting dates, that he worked out the math. The number of deaths per day per 100,000 population would be 0.39 per 100,000 per day for the entire trial, 0.36 per day per 100,000 of the vaccinated group, and then 0.42 deaths per 100,000 per day for the placebo group. So based on those numbers right there, you can see that the deaths in the placebo group are slightly elevated versus the entire study and versus the vaccinated group. Now, he states that of the 13 deaths that occurred in the trial, those running the trial determined to their own and evidently to the FDA's satisfaction that they could not have been due to the vaccine or the placebo, even though 2 of the deaths, one in the vaccinated group, one of the placebo group, had death NOS as description, NOS standing for not otherwise specified. The other deaths were listed as, for the vaccinated group, as cardiorespiratory arrest, myocardial infraction, multi-system organ failure, head injury, and suicide. And for the unvaccinated group, it was cardiorespiratory arrest, myocardial infraction, same as the other group, systemic inflammation response, COVID-19, and abdominal injuries. Now, he goes on to ask how is it that they were able to determine that these deaths were not attributed to the vaccine or the placebo is a mystery, essentially. And that in the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which Dr. Weiler was a part of for some time until he was they attempted to bribe him and he stepped away from the program. He states that it takes up to a decade at least sometimes to be able to determine the deaths and the cause of death. Now, one more interesting point from the article here is that Moderna and Pfizer both made promises for complete transparency. While it is essential that Moderna provides sufficient explanation on the determination of lack of causality for the deaths of the vaccination arm. Also, when comparing the study, and this is key here, he looks at the study-wide numbers of deaths per day per 100,000 for the study to that of the entire U.S. population from 2019. So he compared the average death per day per 100,000 for the study, Moderna study, and compared that to the actual numbers from 2019. And he says he was shocked. The national number of deaths per day per 100,000 is 2.44. Moderna's screening process and exclusion criteria in the Moderna trial led evidence that the general population is dying at a rate that is 6.3 times greater than the death rate in the Moderna trial, which means that the Moderna study, including the estimated efficacy rate and the vaccine's alleged safety profile, cannot possibly be relevant to most of the U.S. population. The super health cohorts studied by Moderna are in no way representative of the U.S. population in terms of health. That is huge. That is key there. So in other words, the vaccine manufacturers are screening out trial participants who may have pre-existing health conditions or may be on medications, for example. They are cherry-picking the trial participants in order to achieve the desired result to gain the emergency use authorization from the FDA, which they are on track to do so at this point. So the reported safety and efficacy numbers established in the trials does not reflect the general population. And there were still 6 deaths in the vaccine group, 13 overall. And they have no idea what the long-term or even short-term effects will be until the public at large is vaccinated in large numbers. Now, to me, this seems very dangerous and reckless, literally experimenting on the population due to a virus with a 99+% survival rate if you're under the age of 70. Now, at the end of the day, the media is not reporting on this. The vaccine manufacturers and the government are not holding press conferences informing you of the deaths that occurred in the trials, warning you of the cherry-picked trial participants which led to the misleading safety and efficacy data. They are not warning you of the very serious potential side effects. They just quietly publish their reports and say, hey, it's 94.5% effective and it'll be here next week. Now, if you or a loved one does get injured by the experimental vaccines, you cannot sue the manufacturers, and don't expect the government to compensate you. The Pfizer CEO himself stated that he has no idea if the vaccine will prevent transmission. 6 people died in the Pfizer trial, 2 in the vaccine group, 4 in the placebo. He admits he hasn't yet taken the vaccine because he doesn't want to cut in line, so he didn't take it for you. What a noble man, huh? Yet, his company is protected from liability by the government. This does not promote confidence, in my view. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to do, whether you should take the shot or not. That's up to you, or at least it should be. I personally do not plan on taking any experimental shots, and neither does more than half of the New York Fire Department. I guess they're anti-vaccine conspiracy theorists too, the New York firefighters. The same goes for at least 40% of the staff at a major Chicago hospital. They stated that they will not be taking the experimental shot. Should they be considered dangerous, crazy, anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorists as well? These are the people we trust our lives with. If the vaccine is so safe and effective, then why have they been caught multiple times faking the injections? As you can see here, the plunger in the syringe is already compressed all the way down. The man in this video was not injected with anything. Now, there was backlash, and they ended up coming out later and saying, well, this nurse received a second dose just to clear up the skepticism, but that one's not on video, and don't ask any questions and just roll up your sleeve. And when the technocrats like Bill Gates or the presidents who have pledged to take their vaccine on camera, like Obama, Bush, and Clinton, roll up their sleeves, just remember that there are ways to deceive the public. It may be a movie prop syringe with a retractable needle like this one here, or maybe not. It also came out about a decade ago that politicians in Germany were receiving different vaccines than the general public. This became a huge scandal and raised the question of a two-tiered medical system, where the elite got vaccines that did not contain toxic ingredients known as adjuvants, such as aluminum and mercury-based preservatives. So chances are, in my opinion, the social elite will not be getting the same vaccines as you or me, the normal taxpayer. I have a lot more in store, so please stay tuned and make sure you follow my work on BitChute because this YouTube channel could disappear at any day. Reporting for ActivistPost.com, I'm Spiro.